Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've got an update in regards to the current trade war with the Chinese, with some people claiming the United States has upped tariffs on China and they are now at 245%. Now, the administration has corrected that, and I'm going to go over it, but we also do have the United States plan to use tariff negotiations to isolate China. That's one of the things that many people thought was going to be happening when Trump announced the global tariff was brought down to 10% outside of China. I remember we still have the separate tariffs when it comes to the auto industry that do affect Mexico and Canada. And we think Mexico and Canada, because of our geographical location to them, are being treated differently. And there will be a separate renegotiated free trade agreement with Mexico and Canada at a later date, possibly after the Canadian election. But when it comes to this, you can see Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent wants trading partners to limit China's involvement in their economics in exchange for concessions on the reciprocal tariffs. And so this is yet another thing the administration is going for when it comes to these negotiations. We know that there's going to be negotiations in regards to the trade barriers that these countries have against the United States, the tariffs that they have, the taxes that they have in terms of the VATs. All of that's going to be part of the negotiations, but a key will also be a commitment from these countries to potentially limit their involvement when it comes to trade with the Chinese as a way to weaken China. We know China has made their plans known to the public in terms of they want to have the overall number one economy in the world. They want to be the biggest, most powerful country in the world within a few decades. And some people say, well, they're lying about their population. They probably are by like 150, 200 million, but they still have a lot more people within China than the United States does, and they've got a lot more poverty. And when it comes to a situation like this with the Chinese, they will suffer in order to appear more noble on a global stage when it comes to a posturing session against the likes of the United States. And so that's where we're at right now. So when it comes to these negotiations, we're also going to be looking for stipulations regarding limiting the trade with China when it comes to the United States removing tariffs, because this is the 90-day period. Originally, Trump had the crazy ballooned tariffs. I mean, he had like 90% tariff on Vietnam, even after Vietnam fully capitulated to where they brought their tariffs on us down to zero. He put mass tariffs on everyone because it was based off of the deficit with the countries that we were tariffing. So we know that the bond market went crazy and Trump got a death indicator, which caused him to reassess the situation and bring the global tariffs down to 10% outside of China, further isolating China. And it seems like that's a bigger part of this trade strategy. I think it's a multi-leveled strategy. You could talk about U.S. economics in terms of the interest rates coming down because of the stock market turmoil, refinancing the trillions of dollars in debt in 2026, and so on. But it's obviously a lot bigger than that when it comes to the reliance we have on China, and that goes to things like rare earths. It goes to just general trade, the amount of things right now that are produced in China that we rely on China for is simply unhealthy, and it needs to change. And so that's really, this war is kickstarting the whole idea of us lowering our reliance on China. And it seems like a lot of these other countries are going to have to lower their reliance on China as well as part of negotiations with the United States outside of what we would consider the cookie cutter negotiations, which is zero tariffs on you, zero tariffs on me. Let's do free trade. A little bit more complicated than that, but that's what the EU proposed. That's what a lot of these countries like Argentina are proposing, Israel, South Korea, to a degree, Japan. They all want that. Well, it's not going to be nearly as simple as that. That's one component of this entire thing, but it comes down to, and then even the negotiations with China, which, by the way, Beijing comes out and says, well, the United States and their officials, they singled out and said their officials need to treat us better. And you have a Chinese official yesterday calling Americans peasants. So talk about the doublespeak from that. I mean, come on. We're not the ones that sat up there high and mighty and said, oh, you need to treat us with respect for us to even negotiate with you guys. And you single out our officials, and then one of your officials says we're all peasants. Really? We're going to do this? It's just not needed. And now we've got the whole rumors of Greenland trying to get in bed with China. How great is that? I did a video on that yesterday. But when it comes to this, another thing I wanted to discuss here looking at this, well, this is the first thing. China is striking back at the tariffs by revealing the true cost of Western luxury brands. So it is pretty interesting to see this like bag that retails for 38,000. It costs like 1,400 to make in their factories, the Chinese factories, and they're calling it out. The Chinese are. And they're showing every step of the way in terms of how these things are produced and made. And just the markup is absurd. So I think that is kind of cool that they're doing that. You can see breaking the White House says China now faces tariffs up to 245%. As you can see down here, China now faces up to a 245% tariff on imports into the United States as a result of their retaliatory actions. Rapid Response 47 says this is misleading. Here's the breakdown. 125% reciprocal tariff, 20% tariff to address fentanyl crisis. That was the original tariff that Trump put on, was 20% on China right at the beginning of all of this. And that was part of the tariffs that he rolled out on Mexico and Canada as well. That was the first initial swath. And then you can see Section 301 tariffs on specific goods between 7.5% and 100% on top of the 125%. So the idea that, oh, we're now tariffing them at 245% is, a lot of this to me is becoming very hazy, because we remember like 5 or 6 days ago, there was this exemption that we think happened, but then Trump said, no, it didn't happen. And he was going to clarify it, and he never really did. There was an exemption on semiconductors. There was an exemption on electronics, and it was brought down back to the 20% baseline. But is that really the case? I guess maybe not. Maybe it was just fake news. But even if that was the case, the point is 75% of the imports are still at 145% tariff. But the idea that it's, all the imports are at 245% tariffs, maybe extremely select goods, but at this point, it really doesn't matter. I mean, doing trade with a 245% tariff, unless your margin is so absurd, or 145%, I should say, it's going to be extremely hard. I mean, this is a trade war, and it'll probably be worked out, we would imagine, but based on what China is doing, their actions, they are digging in their heels. And if there is going to be negotiations and an agreement, this is not going to be us just walking all over the Chinese. Now, we can hurt the Chinese trading situation by utilizing negotiations with other countries, which is what New York Times story was about, and what the Treasury was saying, to where, well, when we negotiate with these other countries, we are going to try and maneuver in such a way to where we limit the trade that other countries do with China as a proxy way to weaken the Chinese, which you can understand. And so that's going to be a part of this entire thing. The whole thing with 245%, I would imagine it's extremely select goods. You can see specific goods. I believe 7.5% to 100% is added on to the 145%, which is where they got the 245% number. China Unhinged, a Chinese official, calls U.S. citizens peasants who are going to be crying tears and talking about how the tariff is going to backfire. But these are the people that are so honorable, and they said that we must respect them if they want to negotiate with us, and then they do this. I mean, come on. Well, we want to negotiate with China. We'll do it. Trump said he's willing to negotiate. It's going to happen. There's going to be some agreement. We cannot untether ourselves completely from China right now. We don't have the infrastructure built up anywhere near where it needs to be. It's more of a weaning off process, is what I would say, when it comes to the trade with China. And rare earths is a great example in terms of the inability to refine rare earths within the United States because of environmental concerns, which needs to be changed in one way or another. Whether you find a place within the United States that's away from population centers, whether you do it up in Canada if you're able to acquire Canada, whether you do it in Greenland if you can acquire Greenland. We know that Greenland is now trying to get in bed with China. That's a real thing. Barely anyone is talking about it. I don't know how. That's exactly what Trump said was going to happen. And that China wanted to move on Greenland, and now Greenland is talking to China. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff coming out here about China, and then this is another thing, people seem to be convoluting the whole China-Taiwan situation. To me, people seem to think, and if you geographically look at it, yes, if you look at China and Taiwan, China is a behemoth. Taiwan is an extremely small island. It seems like it would be ridiculously easy for China to put up a blockade and encircle Taiwan and take it over within a few days. but logistically, it's a nightmare. And I don't think this trade war or us acquiring Greenland would be like, oh, now they're going to take Taiwan. I think it's going to be a lot harder for China and Taiwan. For as small of a country as they are, they have a big advantage in terms of the geography of Taiwan, the amount of mountainous terrain within Taiwan. It is not an easy invasion. And that's why they're trying to do all these gray zones, and they're trying to basically force Taiwan to be tethered to the CCP in terms of their economy. And Taiwan doesn't want that. That's why Taiwan said, we will build and invest over $100 billion in terms of semiconductor production in the United States. They want to have a good relationship with the United States. They said they're not doing retaliation because of the tariffs that we imposed on them. Taiwan said that. They understand that they need to have good trade, global trade, so they're not tethered to the Chinese. But this thing to where it's like, oh, just because of this trade war, it's going to be some justification for China to invade Taiwan. They cannot just invade Taiwan and take it over within 3 days. It's a lot more complicated than that. And so remember, I mean, it's the same thing that people thought. Now, obviously, Ukraine's a lot bigger of a country, but people thought, well, Kiev is going to fall in 2 weeks, and we know where that got Russia. Now, that's not to say the Russians are not going to get a good deal. They will, and that's a dynamic of NATO not being involved in that war. If it is just Russia against Ukraine, even if Ukraine has NATO weapons, Russia has a much stronger military. It's the reality. So they're going to come out on a relative good side, depending on their losses relative to their land gains and their overall power within the country. I don't want to talk about that. This is more so about China in this situation, but in general, what's going on here? They're saying we need to negotiate in good faith. We're not respecting them, and then you've got this stuff where their official comes out and calls us peasants. It's just not appreciated. And I mean, Trump said he's willing to negotiate, so we're going to negotiate. But an interesting wrinkle in this entire thing could be during negotiations with Vietnam, during negotiations with a country like Japan. There will be stipulations to say you need to limit your trade and make a commitment to limiting your trade with China. And that's a way to where, well, we still need to trade with China because we haven't built up the infrastructure. We're weaning ourselves off. That's why we're going to have to negotiate with China. I mean, our deficit with China right now, $350 billion. There could be a commitment within those negotiations to bring the deficit down, to bring it down to zero. It's really not possible right now. We can try and bring it down. And it's more of the predatory stuff with China and the way their markets work when it comes to ripping off certain American goods, producing them for cheaper, and all the mass production that happens because of the amount of manufacturing that the Chinese are able to do with their massive population. And it is funny, I saw one of the stories, they were showing a factory. You know how it is with these stories, you click on them and then they give you a picture of one of the factories within China, and it was like a main Apple producer. The factory looked like it had been abandoned for 12 years. I was like, this is the factory that produces iPhones. It's crazy. But they could produce iPhones in the United States, and based off of the margins that Apple has, probably it would only cost $100 more. The labor for iPhones is extremely, extremely cheap. It just comes down from actually establishing a home base and being able to mass produce in the United States. That's the costly thing. It's upfront. And so we'll have to see what happens when it comes to the situation with these tariffs. Guys, make sure you like this video down below. That's going to do it for this one. Also, make sure you follow me on X. Thank you for watching.